Fellow Redditors, what was a moment where you thought a person you knew might be an actual psychopath? When I was about 7 or 8 there was a kid who was about 6. We found a baby bird that fell out of its nest. In the time it took for me to go home and tell an adult, he put it in the road and ran over it on his bike and laughed. Last I heard he's in jail for beating his girlfriend. When he told me he was a psychopath. Not even kidding. He's a pretty cool guy though and goes to therapy and everything for it. He does his best to relate to people and judge emotion, but it's difficult for him to hold relationships. Pretty smart and is doing the best he can. Hopefully one of the more light-hearted stories on here. Not every psychopath is a monster. They simply have no remorse and very little emotions. It makes it easy to do heinous things when you don't feel bad for it. But it still doesn't change the character of the person. Some people are good, even if they feel no remorse. There is no universal law that says psychopath equals ultimate evil person. I don't have specific moment that's odd. But I have a friend who told me she is schizophrenic and psychopathic. Layman's terms. She hears voices and doesn't really quite understand, care or feels others' emotions. But what makes her a bit of an anomaly is that the voices in her head tell her to do good things and how other people might be feeling. Tip a little extra. Your friend needs a hug right now. Go help your co-worker with their work. Compliment the shoes. They are new. You're doing just fine. Etc. It's quite interesting. I'm a college librarian. He was one of my students who came in a lot. He was super charming and good looking and altogether empty inside. No depth. No emotions. No regard for others. One of our staff straight up said, "That boy's a psychopath." She had been a social worker, so I trusted her opinion and agreed. He collected types of women who saw he told me about seducing a female. Married. Military chaplain and getting her to do sort of things she didn't want to. Then he got bored with her and moved on. He eventually got his master's degree and now works on the military base making big bucks. Getting everyone else to do his work for him. Sometimes psychopaths are dangerous in other ways. He set fire in the attic 3 times. Was disgusted by all animals and would try and abuse our cat whilst we weren't there or looking. Went out and bought a load of knives and swords and kept them in his bed. When I was 8 I let my older cousin, who was probably 11 or 12 at the time, hold my hamster. She was begin really rough with it, so I told her to put it back into its cage. She got really mad after this and just stared at me for about 2 minutes before she turned around and threw my hamster into the wall. My poor hamster died instantly and I was crying because my hamster had just gotten murdered. I knew after she threw it something was extremely wrong with her, and my mom made my aunt come and pick her up, and she wasn't allowed to be near any animals after this. It's been almost 4 years since I've talked to her, but apparently she gets into fights almost weekly. And beat somebody so bad they had to go to ER. She's in therapy and has spent time in juvenile detention. All of my other cousins are afraid of her and many of us think she's going to eventually kill somebody. I honestly think the best place for her would be a mental health hospital. I met an individual who later pled guilty to his involvement in about 14 murders. During an interview about his childhood and personal life, it became very apparent that he had no interest in other people and that they were basically NPCs to him, even his girlfriend and child. He was in a gang and his behavior was basically shadowing the other guys with status. He had a girlfriend because that's what the other guys did. He had a fancy car. He wore the right clothes. The other guys figured out early on that he was not bothered by murder or gunfights. So he was their hitter. During the interview, he was perfectly polite, but utterly flat in his affect and didn't attempt to dissemble or minimize a lot of terrible things that happened to him or the things he'd done. It made for an interesting interview. This one won't be crazy or frightening, but I remember the point at which I recognized sociopathy in my ex. We sat down on his bed at night and I asked him to tell me things about himself, because even though we were dating I knew nothing about him. He could not give an answer beyond surface level on any emotional topic. I looked in his eyes and saw nothingness. I realized why I could never emotionally read him or get any sort of feel. He did tell me after we broke up that he can't feel emotions and how much it sucks. I didn't understand this until much later. Before we dated, I remember him telling me how manipulative he is. With a smile. He lied constantly about everything and had 15 other relationships before me. All ending within a month. Yes. An obvious red flag that I ignored. He would jump from religion to atheism every other month. He would repeat cycles over and over. He was known by everyone and liked by many. Very charming. Had a flirty personality. Loved risk taking for no reason. Always got into trouble. When he beat up my grandma with her exercise bike. That went from 100 to 110 real quick. He found God 3 times in the course of a year. Each time after he had been seen doing significant property damage or emotionally abusing a girl he was with. Like the God thing was a quick trick to get people off his ass. Met a guy and we started talking. The conversation came up about animals. That conversation then led to the killing of animals since I told him a story about how when I was young I climbed a tree and accidentally stepped on a bird's nest and crushed the eggs. I told him that I was scarred for life after that event. He then told me how he killed chickens cause he owned and used them for food, so pretty normal, right? Well, I was wrong. We were out and all of a sudden he tells me if I want to go kill a pigeon and set other animals on fire with him. I told him I did not really feel like it. So he took me to eat some chicken nuggets. Went on a second date with him, but we are not here to talk about my life choices. What is it with crazy people and killing cats? One of my neighbors when I was little had some hamsters. One day I was at her house and she started squeezing them and making them poop because she thought it was funny. She just kept squeezing them harder and harder. I told her to stop or she might hurt them and she started laughing. The next day I asked her grandma what happened to her hamsters and she told me they all died. Another time we were making PB&J sandwiches in her room, IDKY lol, and she cornered me with a knife while laughing. Played soccer with a guy in high school that had a real short temper and enjoyed playing the sport as rough as possible, even at practice. Coaches had to tell him to calm down all the time. Everyone hated him and stayed away from him. Several years later he murdered a classmate of mine over some weed. He hid the body under a pile of leaves in his backyard. When I heard the news, I wasn't surprised in the least. A few years ago, I had to put my cat, Rex, down. He was 21 years. In passing. Not too long ago. I mentioned this to a friend I've known for over 35 years. Out of nowhere he made the statement. I always liked killing cats. I did a double take to see if he was kidding. He wasn't. Haven't spoken to him since. She kicked my leg while we were ice skating to make me fall. It really hurt my back. I couldn't get up. Could barely talk and had trouble breathing. I asked her please to call someone, but she just stood there and laughed at me for a few minutes until I was able to crawl to my phone and call someone. She also said to my adopted brother that he is worth nothing because even his real parents left him in the trash. It was the only time I ever punched someone in the face. He kicked my dog. And when I told him off, he said something along the lines of "Ossie, well, it's not like it's feeling matter." Another friend said, "How would you feel if we kicked you?" And he said that we couldn't do anything that would hurt him. I think he joined the military. But I honestly have lost all contact. I was in the military for a while. There are a lot of really shitty people in the military. I can confidently say for a fair bit of them that if they weren't in the military they'd be in prison instead. When he and a friend RP'd a girl with a flashlight. Edit. At the end of a party. Girl was super drunk and definitely not able to give consent. I'm pretty sure an ex of mine is a psychopath. He had signs of it. Like being manipulative. Very selfish. No empathy. Constant lying. I think the moment I twigged was when he came home early from work and said he'd been sent home because he told his boss I had hung myself the night before. I asked him why he'd said that and he just shrugged. I edited the post because y'all are negative AF. Hours before an assembly in middle school, they were big events as every class was shortened to give each class time, so we all knew when the day started there would be an assembly. This kid that bullied me every single day told me he was going to shoot the school up, and I was worried, of course. But this is the same kid who said he would kill me every now and then, but then he pulled out a F-King revolver and chuckled. Today's gonna be a big day, man. See you at the assembly. I froze and told my closest teacher immediately. Thank God he was retired military. He called the police immediately, and within the 20-minute frame he showed me the gun they found him. His loaded .44 with about 30 rounds in his backpack. Teacher talked to me for about an hour the rest of the day to continue gathering evidence of his bullying to me. Saw him years later for another crime in the news. When my ex-boss at the youth service actually barricaded the door of her office to stop me leaving. She had me cornered in my wheelchair. The office was too small for me to turn round. Meanwhile, my colleagues were outside the office literally trying to break the door down to rescue me. My period was late and I had let the dude know it was. First time my period was ever late while on birth control pills, but I had recently switched to a different one. He immediately started blaming me for not taking my birth control right and that if I was pregnant he would kill me. I even told him I doubted I was pregnant and not to worry, and that the doctor told me that it might happen. Apparently women are most likely to be murdered when they are pregnant. I went to high school with a guy. We weren't close but had a lot of mutual friends, so we were around each other a lot. Once he beat a guy with a tire iron when the guy tried to scam him when he was selling some weed or something. Later on, he went to Iraq and was in some shti. He came home on leave at some point and I was at a bar playing pool with him, and he nonchalantly talked about killing people over there. Said he enjoyed it. He was always very calm and chill when I was around him. But I tried to avoid him after that. There was something broken in there. The weirdest part is that he would have these moments or anecdotes of extreme violence. But he always related them calmly. Never felt any sort of regret for any of it. Obviously you can't diagnose someone off of that sort of thing. But I've read that sociopaths make good soldiers, and he was fairly successful in the army, I believe. My dad said for years that someone I knew at primary school, 7-11, was a psychopath because he often got in fights with random people and showed no empathy after breaking their bones. And he would often lie about stuff to get them in trouble. I thought he was scary and a bit violent, but an alright guy overall. I found out a couple of years ago he's been sentenced to life for murder. Felt no empathy after breaking their bones. But an alright guy overall. He was the stereotypical goth rebel kid in high school. Black trench coat. Bad home life. He had kill tattooed on the inside of his lip and liked to show it off for shock value. Loved breaking rules and saying generally creepy things to get a rise out of people. I didn't know him very well at all. He was a couple years older than me. But I always just assumed, from the few interactions I had with him, that he was just a troubled kid who liked to act out. Several years later he murdered his wife. From what I heard, his story was that it was self-defense and she was coming after him. But who really knows? I heard some rumors that she was found in a position that suggested she was trying to get away from him when he shot her. Regardless, it was a horrific and tragic situation all around. Their baby boy was in the house when it happened as well. I think about him a lot. I think I might have posted about this before. But there was a guy I was in a couple clubs with in high school. He was always really polite but intense. Like the kind of intense you didn't want to make direct eye contact with. If that makes any sense. Anyway. One day we're walking back from McDonald's or somewhere together before our club started. It's just the two of us. And out of nowhere he starts talking about how he's a black belt in some martial art. And gleefully tells me about how in one of his classes they had just learned how to break someone's neck in one move. And how cool it was. I was like, okay then. That's interesting. And just let him go on his merry way. In the back of my mind I was going, this dude is totally going to kill somebody someday. Years later, he makes the local news. Not for murder, but sexual assault. Lady I worked with. She was a little difficult. Very technical. Not very accommodating towards people trying to solve her tech problems. But nothing out of the ordinary. Except occasionally her kids would call her at work and she would say just unforgivable things to them. And then one day she just casually mentions that she has the family pets euthanized when she gets bored with them. I actually didn't believe her and asked her to confirm. I totally understood her correctly the first time. She just straight up kills pets whenever she feels like it. And this woman kept talking about how she should totally get a dog. I went to university with a guy I am positive is a psychopath. Quite pleasant to be around, but he has no regard whatsoever for you. Quite charming actually, and the best ladies man I've ever seen. But once he FCKS them, he's done. Like literally they don't exist to him. I've seen him break up 2-year-long relationships of other people then dump the girl the morning after. I suspected he was a psychopath, but we took a psych class together and he confirmed it to me. Like straight up told me he'd been diagnosed as a teen. I wouldn't call him a bad guy, but he didn't see me or anyone else as human. Just things he enjoyed interacting with. Played D&D and board games with him for years. Still have him on my Facebook but haven't seen him in like a decade. When we were 14 we used to use our school lunch break to go to the local shopping center, mall. One lad bought a hamster for a cute 3 from a pet shop. I still can't believe they sold it to a teenager who immediately put it in his school bag. Close bracket. We stopped at the park on the way back to school to have a smoke. Cigarettes mostly, but this lad had some weed. He took the hamster out and was affectionately stroking and kissing it. Then he blew loads of cannabis smoke into it several times. Then he threw it on the floor and stamped on it. To this day I regret not intervening and not reporting him to our school. One of my former best friends very casually told me he thinks all autistic people should be euthanized. His reasoning? He's never been impressed by them and finds them annoying because they say and do inappropriate things sometimes. He was so completely calm about it. Like it was a completely normal thing to say. It was chilling. He talked about how he put various animals in the microwave to see what would happen. When I found out that, as a child, he'd bury cats with just their heads sticking out and run them over with a lawnmower. He walks this earth a free man. And that's enough internet for today. My ex-husband would snap. In a split second. Between emotional states. He used to make me find sexual situations online, looking through PRN, and tell me to pick which made me the most uncomfortable or I didn't want to do. Then he'd do that or make me do it. He'd have sex with me while tears were streaming down my face. Knock my feet out and pin me to the ground until I also quit being crazy when I would try to leave him. In my university days, I lived with a guy whose girlfriend used to come over to our apartment and hang out fairly often. She was always friendly and a superb baker who frequently brought cakes over to our place. So she was always welcome and we became a fairly close group of friends. Towards the end of our final semester, the guy came home one day and told us he needed to talk about something. And promptly told us that she had confessed to him that she had stabbed her roommate's cat in a fit of anger for failing a class. And then hurriedly buried the corpse in a nearby field. We told him to report her and dump her immediately. Which he refused to do, believing that she just needed someone to support her. Still to this day I can't believe someone as pleasant as she was could have done something so horrific. This guy turned to me. No emotion in sight and said, "What's wrong with hurting people? Full stop."